If at least one of the objects you will see in this video is exactly what it appears to be, then the entire chronology of humanity needs to be revised. We are not dealing with myths or rumors, but with concrete artifacts, items preserved in museums, university warehouses, and private collections, which have already been measured, photographed, and examined, and that, even so, do not fit into the official historical narrative. We speak of hammers embedded in rocks dating back to the era of the dinosaurs, ancient discs with the appearance of modern turbines, underground cities that resemble strategically planned bunkers, inscriptions that seem to link continents that never would have had contact, and stone blocks carved with a level of precision that even today challenges contemporary tools. They are 10 impossible artifacts, 10 enigmas that suggest forgotten technology or traces of a deliberately erased past. Throughout this video, we will analyze each one of them, and the decision remains with you. Are we facing errors of interpretation, natural coincidences, or evidence of a civilization much more advanced than the one accepted by traditional history? Watch until the end, because the last object is the most unsettling of all, and our journey begins in an unexpected setting: the arid mountains of San Pedro in Wyoming. Imagine yourself walking through the dry mountains of San Pedro in the state of Wyoming, in the United States, where the wind cuts through the landscape and the ground seems to keep millenary secrets. It was there, in 1932, that two prospectors, Cecil Main and Frank Carr, were looking for gold, driven by the hope of quick wealth, but ended up coming across something much stranger and more disturbing. Upon blasting the entrance of a cave blocked by rocks, hoping to find a valuable vein, the dust dissipated and revealed a small hidden chamber, a space that seemed untouched for centuries. Inside that small stone sanctuary, there was no gold, silver, or any conventional treasure. There was only a rock ledge, and upon it, a figure sitting in a lotus position, with arms crossed over its body, as if calmly awaiting the moment of its discovery. At first glance, it looked like an ancient doll or a bizarre sculpture created by some unknown craftsman. However, as they approached, the prospectors noticed something unsettling. The texture was organic. That was skin, bones, and flesh preserved. It was a mummy, but not an ordinary mummy. The creature measured about 35 centimeters sitting, which would indicate a little more than 40 centimeters standing. By logic, it should have been a baby or a mummified fetus, something tragic yet understandable. But the face told another story, much more terrifying. There were no infantile features. The eyelids were heavy, the nose flattened, and the thin lips curved in an almost ironic expression. The most shocking detail was the teeth, a complete sharp and pointed set of teeth, typical of a carnivorous adult. When the discovery became public, the scientific community reacted with mockery. Many claimed it was a fraud, a doll made of leather and taxidermy to deceive the curious and generate profit. The mummy, nicknamed Pedro, became a fairground attraction, passing through various hands, until finally researchers decided to analyze it more seriously. In the 1950s, X-ray exams revealed something that silenced the critics. Under the dried skin, there was a completely formed skeleton, a spinal column, ribs, and a skull that still housed a preserved brain. The studies indicated that at the moment of death, that creature was about 65 years of age. The fontanelle at the top of the skull, which remains open in human babies, was completely closed and calcified. Furthermore, the bones showed marks of a difficult life and a violent end. The clavicle was fractured and the spine showed damage, suggesting death in combat or in an extremely brutal accident. It was not a deformed child or a fetus. It was a miniature adult, a complete biological anomaly. Quickly, anthropologists began to investigate regional folklore in search of explanations and found the ancient legends of the Nemerigar. According to the traditions of the Shoshone indigenous people, who have inhabited the region for thousands of years, there existed a race of little people, fierce warriors who measured less than 1 meter in height, known for their aggressiveness and the use of poisoned arrows. They said these beings lived in caves and were feared even by larger tribes. Would Pedro be physical evidence that these stories were not just myths passed around the campfire? Unfortunately, Pedro's fate is as enigmatic as his emergence. After changing owners several times, the mummy ended up in the possession of a man named Leonard Wadler back in the 1970s. Wadler never revealed where he kept the artifact stored, and after his death, Pedro's trail was simply lost. Today, only the records remain: old radiographs, black and white photographs, and the reports of the scientists who had the opportunity to examine it. The physical body disappeared, taking with it the DNA that perhaps could rewrite entire chapters of human history. We leave behind the mystery of the American mountains and head toward one of the most hostile and relentless environments on the planet, frozen Siberia. In this white vastness, where the ground has remained frozen for thousands of years, something began to happen in a terrifying and difficult-to-explain way. Imagine piloting a helicopter over the apparently infinite tundra and suddenly spotting a colossal wound, black and perfectly outlined, tearing the surface of the Earth. This is not a gradual erosion or a common landslide. It is a deep, dark and terrifying hole, appeared almost overnight, as if something gigantic had erupted from the depths toward the surface. The phenomenon caught the world's attention in 2013 in the Yamal Peninsula, a name that, in the language of the indigenous peoples of the region, literally means the end of the world, and rarely has a name been so appropriate. The first identified crater had impressive proportions, about 80 meters in diameter, and a depth so great that it seemed to swallow light itself. Unlike traditional sinkholes, where the ground simply collapses inward, the edges of these craters indicated a violent and explosive event, with ice and earth thrown outward, as if a colossal internal pressure had finally broken its confinement. Science tried to offer a reassuring explanation with the theory of the so-called ice volcano. According to this hypothesis, global warming is melting the permafrost, releasing enormous pockets of methane gas trapped for millennia. When the pressure becomes unbearable, the ground explodes like a faulty pressure cooker. Still, certain details continue to intrigue specialists. The almost cylindrical shape of some holes and the absence of signs of combustion in others challenge simple explanations. It is an unsettling reminder that the planet is in constant transformation, opening deep scars that may hide secrets about both the climate of the past and the uncertain future of our atmosphere. While nature tears the earth in Russia, on the other side of the world, in China, a mystery created by human hands has challenged logic for more than 2,000 years. In Zhejiang province, what for centuries was seen only as a set of deep ponds in a rural village was revealed, in 1992, to be one of the most extraordinary underground structures ever discovered, the Longyu Caves. It all began when a local resident, intrigued by the apparently infinite depth of the water, decided to drain one of the ponds. After days of pumping, the water level dropped and revealed not the bottom of a natural lake, but the entrance to a gigantic chamber carved into the rock. What came to light was simply impressive, a complex of 24 monumental artificial caves occupying an area exceeding 30,000 square meters. Each of them descends about 30 meters below the surface and features wide halls, massive pillars, and incredibly straight walls. However, the true shock came when engineers and archaeologists tried to estimate the effort required for such a work. To excavate just one of these caves, it would be necessary to remove tens of thousands of cubic meters of solid rock. Where did all this material go? There are no archaeological records of mountains of debris scattered across the region. The precision of the construction is the aspect that most disconcerts specialists. The walls and ceilings are not smooth. They display perfectly regular excavation marks, with parallel and symmetrical striations identical in all caves. These marks maintain a constant angle of 60 degrees, something extremely difficult to sustain manually on such an extensive and irregular surface. The result resembles the work of a gigantic mining machine more than the effort of ancient workers equipped with rudimentary bronze or iron tools. To make the enigma even greater, none of the caves connect directly, despite being separated in some points by rock walls only 50 centimeters thick, evidencing a level of topographical planning that borders on the impossible for the known technology of the time. How would an ancient society have been able to excavate true underground cathedrals without causing the collapse of the ceilings? In what way did they light these spaces to work with such exactness if there are no traces of soot left by torches on the walls or ceilings? And perhaps the most disturbing point, the total absence of historical records. Ancient China was famous for its rigorous bureaucracy. Emperors documented rice harvests, regional conflicts, and even modest constructions with impressive detail. Yet, a colossal work, which would have required thousands of workers over decades, simply does not appear in any scroll chronicle or stone stele. This sense of temporal displacement, of finding something too sophisticated for the time in which it was supposedly created, forces us to question the traditional chronology of human inventions. If the marks left on the walls of Longyu suggest the use of some kind of machinery, the next item on our list goes even further, pointing to something apparently impossible, the fusion of materials we consider modern with ancient geological formations. Now we head to Texas, where a banal walk in 1936 led to the discovery of an object that, by the known laws of physics and geology, simply should not exist there. A find capable of shaking humanity's very timeline. On the outskirts of the small town of London in the state of Texas, an ordinary couple, Max and Emma Hahn, were walking peacefully along the dry bed of a creek on a scorching day in 1936. They were not scientists or explorers, just curious people who noticed an unusual rock among the gravel. What caught their attention was a fragment of petrified wood that seemed to emerge from the interior of the stone, as if it had grown there. Intrigued, they took the object home, where it ended up serving as a doorstop for almost 10 years, silent and forgotten, guarding a secret capable of challenging all geological chronology. Only in 1947, moved by a late curiosity, did the couple's son decide to break the rock to find out what was inside. Upon splitting the limestone, he did not find a plant or animal fossil, but a surprisingly well-preserved iron hammerhead, apparently fused to the rock around it at a molecular level. The wooden handle was not just attached. It showed clear signs of carbonization and fossilization, indicating it had remained there long enough to transform into coal under intense pressure. The astonishment was immediate. How could a relatively modern human tool be encapsulated in a rock formation millions of years old? The geology of the area where the rock was found dates back to the Cretaceous period, the famous era of the dinosaurs, more than 100 million years old. If we accept this dating, only two equally absurd possibilities remain. Either the dinosaurs mastered metallurgy and manufactured tools, or technologically advanced human beings walked the earth long before the emergence of even the first primates. The so-called London hammer quickly became a classic example of an out-of-place object, something that deeply bothers traditional science, as its existence is, in itself, a paradox. Metallurgical analyses performed later made the case even stranger. The hammerhead is composed of approximately 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur. There are no traces of carbon, a fundamental element for steel production, nor the typical impurities found in both ancient and modern iron. This unusual chemical composition, with a degree of purity difficult to achieve even with advanced industrial techniques, created a natural resistance to oxidation, explaining the absence of rust. The skeptics argue that the hammer may have fallen into a fissure in the rock, and thanks to a rare combination of soluble minerals and specific environmental conditions, was quickly enveloped by limestone deposits over a few centuries and not millions of years. This is the so-called rapid concretion theory. However, it does not fully explain the advanced level of fossilization of the wooden handle, nor the highly anomalous chemical composition of the metal. For defenders of an alternative history, the hammer would be definitive evidence of an advanced pre-Diluvian civilization, erased by some cataclysm, and of which only technological fragments swallowed and preserved by the Earth itself remained. Leaving behind the enigmas of North America, we cross the ocean toward Turkey, landing in the almost extraterrestrial landscape of Cappadocia. Here, the mystery is not limited to a small object, but to a gigantic infrastructure that remained hidden for centuries. In 1963, during an apparently trivial domestic renovation, a man knocked down a wall in the basement of his house. He expected to find only earth or an old room, but came face to face with a deep and dark void. Upon lighting the opening, he noticed a tunnel that extended downward toward the bowels of the earth. Without knowing it, he had rediscovered Derinkuyu, the most complex and impressive underground city ever found in the world. We are not talking about a simple improvised hiding place or a natural cave hastily adapted. Derinkuyu is a masterpiece of human survival engineering. The city deepens through 18 levels below the surface, reaching about 85 meters in depth. It is a true human anthill, excavated manually in relatively soft volcanic rock, designed to comfortably accommodate up to 20,000 people, in addition to their animals, food reserves, and essential supplies. While walking through its narrow and claustrophobic tunnels, it is impossible not to feel the weight of history and the fear that drove such a monumental construction. After all, who would choose to live voluntarily in almost permanent darkness? The ventilation system reveals impressive technical genius. Vertical shafts up to 50 meters deep cross all levels of the city, ensuring the constant circulation of fresh air to the deepest chambers. This allowed thousands of people and animals to breathe without difficulty. There were facilities for wine production, oil presses, stables, collective refectories, chapels, and even educational spaces. Every detail was carefully planned so that the population could remain underground for months, perhaps even years, without needing to return to the surface. It was, in essence, a Noah's Ark carved in stone, buried to protect its inhabitants from a terrible threat that dominated the outside world. Even more unsettling is the defensive system. The main corridors could be sealed in seconds by enormous circular stone doors, similar to millstones, some weighing up to 500 kilograms. These doors could only be operated from the inside, completely isolating each level of the city. This indicates that Derinkuyu was not conceived just as a shelter against bad weather or wild animals, but as a defense against an intelligent, persistent, and extremely dangerous enemy. It was a fortress of fear, built to resist organized invasions or systematic persecutions. From the dark depths of Turkey, our journey now leads us to the dense and humid jungles of Southeast Asia, specifically to southern Laos. There, hidden among the imposing ruins of the Wat Po Temple, a complex even older than the famous Angkor Wat, is a stone shrouded in death and mystery. Known as the Crocodile Stone, it was carved directly into the bedrock, permanently merging with the forest floor. It is not a transportable statue, but a fixed, immovable altar that seems to have witnessed dark rituals that defy the imagination. Its shape is clear and disturbing, the rough yet precise outline of a life-sized crocodile. What makes this sculpture especially unsettling is not just its animal appearance but its proportions, which coincide in a macabre way with those of a lying human adult body. According to persistent local legends, passed down in whispers over generations, this was not a place of peaceful worship. It is believed that during the height of the Chenla Empire, between the 6th and 8th centuries, the stone functioned as an altar for human sacrifices. Annually, to appease protective spirits of the mountain and ensure good harvests, offerings were made there, and they went far beyond flowers or incense. Still, modern archaeology encounters the absence of direct physical proof. No marks of fossilized blood or inscriptions were found that unequivocally confirmed the use of the stone as a site for ritual execution. What remains are the folklore, the oral accounts, and the unsettling resemblance of the rock to a body ready to be offered. To further complicate the enigma, the crocodile, although part of the local fauna, did not occupy a central role in the Hindu-Buddhist pantheon that influenced the architecture and rituals of Wat Po. This suggests that the crocodile stone may be a vestige of a much older, primitive and obscure animist cult, later absorbed, but not totally erased, by the religions that came after. Was it a warning, a silent memorial, or a practical tool of execution? Covered in moss, exposed to the monsoon rains, the stone remains motionless, guarding the secret of who or what was offered upon its surface. We leave the organic mystery of the jungle to return to the desert, to the cradle of civilization, where stone ceases to be raw and becomes shaped with a sophistication that challenges any simple explanation. In Egypt, specifically in the Saqqara necropolis, archaeologist Walter Bryan Emery made, in 1936, a discovery that to this day seems like an error in reality itself. While excavating the tomb of Prince Sabu, son of a pharaoh of the First Dynasty, dating back more than 5,000 years, he found fragments of an object that simply did not seem to belong to that time, the enigmatic and disconcerting Sabu disc. This circular artifact, approximately 61 centimeters in diameter, was carefully reconstructed and revealed a geometry that disconcerts any historical expectation. The disc features 3 curved blades, or lobes that project inward, converging toward a hollow central axis. The shape unsettlingly resembles a sports car steering wheel, the propeller of a hydraulic pump, or even a contemporary turbine component. The symmetry is impeccable, the balance is precise, and the design clearly conveys the idea of mechanical function, movement, and rotation, concepts that, in theory, were not part of the known engineering of that era. The material of the Sabu disc makes the enigma even deeper. It was fashioned from metamorphic schist, a rock famous for its fragility and for splitting into sheets. Carving thin and complex curves in this type of material, using only copper chisels and stone tools, the resources available in the First Dynasty would almost certainly result in the breakage of the piece. Schist fragments easily. It does not mold like clay nor respond well to cutting like granite. Whoever produced the Sabu disc mastered a manufacturing technique lost today, or alternatively, utilized methods that did not involve direct impact. Traditional explanations try to frame the object as a simple ornamental vase, an incenser, or perhaps the base of a lamp. However, these hypotheses fail to justify the aerodynamic complexity of the internal flaps. Why employ a design so difficult and risky to execute if the function was merely decorative or ritualistic? Modern engineers who analyze the shape suggest similarities with a flywheel or with parts used in chemical mixing processes. Would it be possible that the ancient Egyptians had access to some type of mechanical technology that we, through historical arrogance, believe to be an exclusively modern invention? What if the contact between distant civilizations had been much more frequent and deep than textbooks admit? In 1958, on the cold shores of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, a peasant found a stone basin that would shake the foundations of linguistics and archaeology on the American continent. The object, known as the Fuente Magna, is a large ceremonial vessel decorated with zoomorphic and anthropomorphic figures. However, the true impact was not in the carved images, but in the interior of the piece, where mysterious inscriptions awaited interpretation. What at first glance seemed only like a decorative pattern revealed itself to be the heart of the mystery. When linguists began to analyze the symbols more closely, they noticed something disturbing. They did not correspond to any known writing of the Andean civilizations, such as Tiwanaku or Inca. Instead, they showed remarkable similarities with 2 writing systems of ancient Mesopotamia, separated from the Americas by an entire ocean: Sumerian cuneiform and Proto-Sumerian. Researcher Clyde Winters, a specialist in ancient languages, dedicated years to the study of the artifact and stated that the inscriptions describe rituals dedicated to the goddess Neash, in addition to mentioning the promotion of a code of moral purity. According to this interpretation, the Fuente Magna would be a sophisticated ceremonial object, possibly used in rituals linked to fertility and the observation of the heavens. However, the simple fact that the writing is associated with Sumer, a civilization that flourished in the Middle East, places the Bolivian basin at the center of an explosive hypothesis that there was transoceanic contact between Mesopotamia and South America about 4,000 years before Columbus. This possibility implies that Sumerian navigators, or perhaps an intermediate culture influenced by them, would have crossed oceans, established cultural exchanges, and left physical traces in pre-Columbian America. Such an idea dismantles the dogma of isolated evolution, according to which American civilizations would have developed without any external influence until the arrival of the Europeans. For the traditional academic environment, the Fuente Magna is usually dismissed as a forgery or a misinterpretation, but the coherence of the symbols with ancient Sumerian writing continues to be an inconvenience that is difficult to ignore. We leave the enigmatic symbolism of Bolivia to find a more recent, yet no less intriguing mystery in the dry mountains of Coso, California. The year was 1961, when 3 mineral collectors searching for geodes broke open an apparently ordinary rock. Initial disappointment quickly turned into astonishment. In place of crystals, the interior of the stone revealed something that seemed to have been manufactured on an industrial assembly line. It was a core composed of metal and ceramic, surrounded by a crust of hardened clay and encrusted with crystals. The object became known as the enigmatic Coso artifact. The object found inside the rock had an unmistakable cylindrical shape, typical of a technological component. There was no doubt that it was something manufactured and not a natural formation. The core was made of a corrosion-resistant metallic alloy, wrapped in a white ceramic material, and at one of its ends featured a small copper element. Its appearance was so familiar that some researchers quickly suggested a prosaic explanation. It looked like a spark plug, a common automotive part from the early decades of the 20th century, possibly produced by the Champion Company. The real problem, however, was not in the object itself, but in the structure that surrounded it. In the beginning, collectors and mystery enthusiasts claimed that the rock encapsulating the artifact was genuinely geological and would be about 500,000 years old, which would transform the object into explosive evidence of human, or even alien, technology in ice ages. This interpretation, although extremely sensationalist, was quickly dismissed by conventional geological analyses. Still, even the skeptics had to admit there was something out of the ordinary. The rock around the object was, in fact, an extremely hard and complex mineral concretion, composed of iron oxide and crystallized quartz. With this, the central question ceased to be, does this artifact have hundreds of thousands of years? And became, how fast can nature encapsulate a modern object? The most plausible explanation is that the piece fell into a crack in the ground, and over time, mineral-rich water accumulated and solidified around it, forming the concretion. The problem is that the level of hardening and crystallization of this shell, supposedly occurred in only a few decades, is extremely rare. Nature, in this case, seems to have reproduced the effects of deep time at a disturbing speed, blurring the distinction between millennia and mere years. The Coso artifact functions as an important warning. Not every out-of-place object is necessarily proof of lost civilizations or extraterrestrial visitors. Sometimes it is an example of how poorly understood geological processes can deceive us. Still, the case clearly illustrates how time, the greatest sculptor of all, can transform a banal object into an archaeological enigma, requiring explanations that range between geology, technology, and the very notion of chronology. The last item in this gallery of impossibilities takes us to a relatively more recent, but no less intriguing past in the New England region. In 1872, near Lake Winnipesaukee, in the state of New Hampshire, workers were digging a hole to install posts when they found, more than 2 meters deep, a perfectly polished object, completely out of context. It was an egg-shaped stone about 10 centimeters long, made of quartz or dark sandstone. Although it was not a sophisticated metal, its manufacture suggested a level of skill that seemed out of place both in time and in the location where it was found. The piece, which became known as the Lake Winnipesaukee Mystery Stone, or simply the Egg Stone, was initially treated as a curiosity. However, it soon became clear that it was not a natural formation. Its surface was richly ornamented with detailed engravings and incisions. On one side there was a stylized human face. In other areas, figures appeared resembling ears of corn, symbols reminiscent of arrows, and, particularly interestingly, images evoking fish or carp. It was evident that it was an object loaded with meaning, perhaps ceremonial or mnemonic, created to transmit a story or specific knowledge. What elevated this polished stone to the category of an impossible object, however, were its ends. The piece has 2 holes that pass through it longitudinally, one at each end. These holes are not irregular or rudimentary. They feature a uniform diameter and impressive precision, as if they had been made with a modern high-speed drill. The type of perforation, known as biconical, would require hard rotating tools and advanced abrasives, technologies that are not attributed to the native peoples of North America before the arrival of Europeans. If we accept that the stone was produced by pre-Columbian indigenous cultures, we are forced to admit that they mastered techniques and drilling tools that left no other archaeological traces in the region. Precision instruments and abrasive materials capable of overcoming the hardness of quartz would be necessary. On the other side, if the piece was manufactured after European colonization, why was it buried at such depth, and why is there no historical record of its creation? The enigma remains intact. The stone challenges the technological limits we attribute to any culture that inhabited the region before 1872. Anomalies such as the tiny mummy known as Pedro, the colossal craters that open abruptly in Siberia, the underground city of Derinkuyu, and the Egyptian disk, whose shape unsettlingly resembles a modern turbine component, force us to reconsider everything we believe we know about the human past. We are not facing simple archaeological curiosities, but concrete physical traces that, when analyzed together, reveal a much more intricate, intriguing, and uncomfortable panorama of human history. They point to the possible existence of vanished cultures, lost technical knowledge, and global connections that would have occurred much earlier than traditional science is willing to accept. The great lesson left by these so-called out-of-place artifacts is the need for intellectual humility. Science often prefers to see human evolution as a straight line going from rudimentary to sophisticated, from simple to complex. However, these anachronistic pieces function as tight knots in this narrative thread, suggesting that knowledge does not only advance in continuous progression, but also in cycles, emerging, flourishing, and disappearing in ways that we still understand very little. The planet itself functions as a vast and ancient archive, much deeper than any history book. And with each natural explosion, each archaeological excavation, or each exposed fracture in the rock, it gives us back fragments of a truth that forces us to rethink who we were and who we can still become. The enigmas continue without a definitive solution. The London Hammer continues to challenge explanations in Texas. The Longyou Caves remain silent regarding the identity of their builders, and the Mystery Stone of Winnipesaukee still keeps the secret of its impeccable perforations. However, the simple fact of recording, questioning, and investigating these cases already represents a victory of the curious and restless human spirit. Thank you for accompanying this journey with us. And the final question remains: if these objects were truly the work of visitors from another world, why would they have been abandoned here, buried in the rock and in time, instead of being taken back home?